Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Elitist Geek, and the first in a series that I'm calling How to Build Your Own VR Rig. Because that's exactly what we're going to do. We are going to build our own virtual reality rig. This is a video that I've been wanting to make for close to 4 months now. It was something I talked about probably for the first time in late May or early June of this year. And it's been a while, but I can finally say the time is right. Circumstances are such that we can build it. So what I'm going to do here is do this as multiple episodes. And the reason is there's a lot of meat to cover. First episode, I want to show you guys the components and the kinds of choices and thoughts that are going to go behind those components. So the stuff that you want to put in your system. And they're not super technical questions or thoughts, but they're important because ultimately they're going to make the difference on hitting certain types of things that you want to be able to do versus not being able to do them. So that's the first episode. It's going to be all about parts and deciding which parts. Second episode is going to be the actual building. That's the episode where we're going to put all those components together into the system. Third one is going to be finishing touches, software, which is going to be operating system. It's going to be drivers, and most importantly, it's going to be adding your virtual reality system. Now, because I'm in a lucky position and own both the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift, I'm going to use both and show you how to install both, which for me is going to be at the same time, which is good. Now, the reason for me to build this, everybody needs a reason to want to build something, right? Some of you may just not have a machine that's powerful enough to do VR. So it served you faithfully for quite a few years, and it was a good gaming machine, but it doesn't even meet the minimum recommended specifications, which can happen. Or maybe it was used mostly for business stuff. You're a console gamer, and hey, you want to mess around with an HTC Vive or a Rift, and you want to take that plunge into the PC world. Well, definitely these episodes are going to be for you because that's exactly what we're going to cover. So let's get started. Let's talk about the components, and let's talk about what my reason is for doing this. So part of having this YouTube channel, I want to be able to show virtual reality games and experiences. I'm not tied into the Vive or the Rift or the Sony PlayStation or the Gear VR. I'm going to get them all. And I've already got 3 of 4. October 13th, I get the Sony. I'll have 4 of 4. It's about the games. And the PC is what lets you play those freaking games. So having a powerful station already, I've got a main gaming station here to my left that has a 1080 Founders Edition in it. It's got 16 gigs of RAM, Skylake i5, overclocked, runs beautifully. Okay, that's kind of the high end for now, at least the next few months. What I had over there was an R9 290, which was kind of low end, entry level for VR, but crippled with an older i5 that was still totally capable of running the virtual reality games, but generated error messages because it didn't meet their idea of the minimum recommended, right? But we'll get into that when we talk about CPUs. So where do you start with a new computer build? Well, let's assume this is entirely from scratch. Let's say that computer that you have is going to be given to somebody. Maybe it's a hand-me-down. You're going to give it to your folks, give it to a younger sibling, cousins, who the hell knows? Sell it, right? But you're not going to keep it and use it as a foundation. You're literally going to start from scratch. What do you need to do that? The first thing you need is a case. And you can see right down here, this is a typical computer case. And the standard that we use right now mostly is called ATX. And don't worry about the acronym. We're not going to get into all kinds of crazy acronyms. Just remember that ATX is the type of tower that you have. That's the easiest way to remember it. If you have a regular ATX, it's full size. If you have micro ATX, it's smaller. And then there's like mini and ITX, which is the smallest. Literally, a couple of notches bigger than a Raspberry. Okay, a little bit bigger than that, but still pretty damn small. Generally, you would get a full-size case if you're going to do stuff like SLI mode, Crossfire. You want multiple graphic cards with a lot of hard drives, lots of SSD drives, and lots of space for airflow or cooling systems. Yeah, you want a full-size case. And this case that you're looking at here is on the higher end of mid-size, but it is a mid-size case, okay? What I like about mid-size cases is they can still fit graphic cards that are full length, and we'll get into that when we touch on graphic cards. So your case would be your very first component. So I would consider either a medium tower or a full-size ATX tower as your initial choice, because you're going to be able to put a full-size card. Everything else that we're going to cover is compatible with both of those, okay? So that's your case. That's where everything is going to go in. Your motherboard, your power supply, your CPU, your RAM, your hard drives, cables, everything is going to go inside the PC, except for your keyboard and mouse and your monitor. The next most important thing is the motherboard. And you can see here, and what I've done is I'm holding it with an anti-static bag. It's very important when we work on these components that we ground ourselves. I'm pretty lucky. I live on the west coast, which we affectionately call the wet coast. It's very humid here. There's lots of moisture in the air. There's not a lot of static, okay? But I'm still very prone to static. There still is enough static. If you are in an area with a lot of static electricity, you have to. It's not optional. You have to ground yourself. And there's a couple of things you can do. You can get anti-static wrist strap. You basically tie it off on your wrist, connect it to the metal chassis of your computer case or some other metallic body, okay? That basically ensures that any static electricity that you're generating in your body, instead of storing it, you're distributing it out to the metallic object constantly. So you're never building that static charge. So you've got that out of the way, you're grounded, you've got your case open. The very first, most important thing that goes into that is the motherboard. Now there's a couple of different styles of motherboard. They have all the same sizes that I talked about with the cases. You've got your full size, you've got your micro, and then you've got your mini. So ATX, ATX, and mini ITX. Those are all the different sizes. Generally, for a performance or gaming PC, you can build them with minis, but you usually start running into troubles when you consider your case, because the case for a lot of those isn't going to fit a full-size video card that you're going to need for VR. Now, there are some exceptions. There's a GTX 1070 that fits mini ITX cases. It's perfect for that, but you're paying a bit more of a premium and they're not as common, okay? So back to the motherboard though, you've generally got a couple of different types. You've got gamer / enthusiast or hobbyist motherboards, and then all the rest. The gaming / enthusiast motherboards are ones that have lots of flexibility. They've usually got lots of additional little features, ports, extra USB. They can overclock better. They've got like all kinds of settings and tolerances for larger overclocks. Overclocking is basically running your CPU and motherboard at temperatures and speeds faster or higher than it's used to get more performance out of it, i.e. run your game faster, okay? So I would recommend you get a gamer's motherboard / enthusiast. So this one here is a Gigabyte Z170-HD3. So It's not a pure gamers one, but it's not a pure business one either. It's kind of a hybrid in between, which is the role that I wanted for this PC, okay? So like I was saying, this is my high end. The new one I'm building is going to be my low end PC because I want to be able to show people on the channel, this is what you can expect on the high end performance wise. Now we're going to do the same thing on the entry level. This is what you can expect, okay? So you've got the case, you've got the motherboard. The next thing you need is the CPU. CPU is this super tiny little die. That's it. That's your CPU. This is a Skylake, which is the current generation, 6600 non-K. And that just means it's locked. It's not unlocked. You cannot change the multipliers, meaning you can't overclock the CPU directly. You can overclock the motherboard still, but that's prone to kind of more considerations, and it's not as easy as of an overclock as it is to just change the multiplier on these. But because this represents our entry-level basic system, I don't want to overclock it. So I'm fine with a locked processor. The advantage of a locked processor, the main one, you get one of these, which is a heatsink and a fan. Without this, that CPU turned on would turn off within about 2 seconds of turning the power on because it would generate so much heat. If you have a mechanism in your motherboard that detects heat and shuts itself down, you'll be fine. If you don't, the chip will burn up and you got to buy a new CPU, probably a new motherboard and RAM and a bunch of other stuff as well. So the locked processors have a heatsink and fan. That's to get the heat off of the CPU. If you've got an unlocked processor, they generally just come with the CPU, and you will have to buy your own aftermarket heatsink and fan because that stock one isn't good enough for most overclock speeds, okay? But again, because it's a low entry level, I don't need that. So you've got your case, you've got your motherboard, you've got your CPU. And just one more final word on the CPU. Don't get anything that's not a Core i5 or a Core i7. And that's older than about the last 2 generations, okay? You can get a Sandy Bridge, which is a 2011 CPU, and run it with a graphic card. And we'll get into that. I'll give you an example. So let's talk about graphic cards first, though, before I do, okay? So this here is an R9 290 from Gigabyte. This is considered an entry-level GPU for virtual reality. It is approximately entry-level, equivalent with like an NVIDIA 970, okay? I used to run this in crossfire mode, meaning I had 2 of these in the system, but it rarely worked. I was rarely happy with it, and it was just entry-level for VR. So there were definitely performance issues with Elite Dangerous and games that I wanted to play at higher frame rates. It worked, it wasn't ideal, but it's good enough for this machine. So R9 290 and 970 are kind of your entry levels. You want to go faster than that if you want more performance, like up to the 1080s and the new Titan X's, okay? Now, the most important thing, if you have to make a choice between the CPU and the GPU, anytime that becomes a choice, if the CPU is within 3 generations of the CPU that you're looking at, you're probably going to be okay. The GPU should be the one that you pick 9 times out of 10, because 9 times out of 10, that's what's going to give you the most performance, not this. Here's a quick example, okay? You've got 2 people. One person has an older i5, like I had, the Sandy Bridge from 2011. The other person, person B, has this one, the Skylake, modern i5 processor. They both have the exact same graphic card, this R9 290. Let's assume the game that the guy with the newer CPU is playing, he's getting 60 frames per second. What can the guy with the Sandy Bridge CPU expect with the same graphic card? And if you're thinking anything more than about 10% difference, you'd be wrong. Generally, it's going to be 0 to about 10% for most games. There's always exceptions, but the majority of games, the CPU is going to make no big difference. It'll be 0 to 10% at most. So if you're getting 60, the one guy, the one with the Sandy Bridge, he might be getting 52 to 60. Close, but a tiny little bit slower. Now, let's assume they both have Skylake, so they both have this good processor, the exact same one. One has the R9 290, one has the 1080. The guy with the 1080, he's still getting his 60 frames per second. What do you think the guy with the R9 290 is getting? So if you're thinking the same, maybe 52 to 60, you'd be wrong. He's probably getting less than half. That's right, probably 20 to 30 frames per second versus the 60 that the other guy is getting. And that's simply because most games are GPU challenged. They need this to be fast, not the CPU. That's why I always tell people, if they're considering an upgrade, this is the first upgrade you make for performance. Often it's the only one you have to make, unless your CPU is really, really old. Like if you had a Core 2 Duo, absolutely upgrade that. But your Sandy Bridge is going to run at 1080, almost as good as the Skylake. If you're getting into SLI or Crossfire, absolutely get the Skylake. It's going to be much better. You will get CPU challenge then, okay? The other thing you're going to need to power your CPU, motherboard, and case is this. And that's a power supply. And you can see this one here. It's a 750 watt Corsair modular power supply. Modular just means that all the cables that run from the power supply to your hard drives, to the motherboard, to the graphic card, to the CPU are all ones that you can take off or connect. So you only have to use as many cables as you need. The rest you can leave in the box. So if you have a choice, get a modular power supply. And again, that's where all the cables are attachable, right? They're not permanently attached to the power supply. They're plug and play. A 750 watt like this is going to be fine for pretty much any single card solution that's out there right now. The 1080s are much better than the 980s, for example, in terms of how much power they draw. So a 750 watt power supply is probably going to be okay for a single card of anything, okay? If you want to go Crossfire or you want to go SLI, now right now that's really not going to benefit you in virtual reality mode. But if you want to do that regardless for other reasons, then I would suggest a better power supply than the 750. You may be able to get by, depending on the graphic card, right? Like the 1060s are really low power draw. You could probably do that in SLI, but I wouldn't push it. I would get 1,000 watt minimum if you're doing Crossfire or SLI. Personally, I went overkill. My main rig, it has a 1,300 watt. But just to give you an idea, because for me, stability is key. So we've got the case, motherboard, CPU, GPU, power supply. What else do we need? We need RAM. So RAM is very important. That's the memory, okay? I'll hold it down here. And this is HyperX, right? Yeah, HyperX RAM. And these are Fury DIMMs, so 16 gigabytes. Memory-wise, I recommend a minimum of 8. Worst case, if you can do 16, do 16. So in fact, you know what? I personally scratch that. 16 gigabytes would be my minimum recommendation because that's going to ensure that you have all the memory that you need. So this Kingston HyperX, Kingston is the manufacturer, is going to be fine. There are higher end brands of memory that will allow you to overclock and do all kinds of things. My opinion is, of the types of overclocks you can do, this would be the one with the least results as a result of overclocking it. It's the one that's going to give you the lowest return, okay, compared to overclocking your CPU or your GPU. It can be done most of the time. I don't bother. I leave it on auto. But that's your memory. You need that. Then you're going to need hard drives. And you've got a couple of options here. You've got the old standby mechanical ones. This is a 3.5-inch hard drive, right? And if I can break the seal here, I'm going to open it. Notice how it's also in a static bag, right? I keep all of those for grounding myself. But you can see it's a SATA drive. What was this? This was a 2 terabyte drive. This is what's called a SATA drive. So, easiest way to think of this, it has no moving parts. It's kind of like the RAM. You plug it in and it's just electrical current. There's no moving components in this. Now, there used to be a time where these had lots of problems, and they still have the odd problem, because people would treat them like regular drives and try to do stupid stuff like defrag it. It doesn't quite work the way it uses trimming, and you could have a whole episode on these. The main thing to remember is, because they have no moving parts, these are very, very fast. Install, if you can, always your operating system on one of these, okay? I personally recommend your operating system and all the current Steam games or VR games, whatever you happen to be playing, whatever's in your top 5 or 10, put on one of these, because you're gonna get the best performance. Load times are quicker, everything's quicker. There's a game I love to play, Skyrim. There's one configuration of that game that uses 800 mods. Without using one of these, it's almost not worth playing because the load times are so long. With one of these, it's probably the best gaming experience of your life. So, if possible, like a 480 like this would be enough for the operating system, and at least half a dozen to a dozen Steam games at any given time. That would be all you need. Use the mechanical drive for data. This would be stuff like movies, songs, pictures, all that kind of stuff. Word files, Excel, that's what you throw on the mechanical drive, okay? Last thing is, so let's just recap. We've talked about the case, the motherboard, the CPU, the GPU, the power supply, the RAM, the hard drives. Now, there's one more type of drive. There's either an optical drive, and we have one here. So this is a DVD drive, okay? SATA. You can still use these, but the only thing I found myself using these for the last 5 years is loading Windows. So I decided, you know what? I'm not even going to use these for loading Windows. I'm just going to use a USB thumb drive. So for me personally, I don't use optical drives anymore. There's no point. I put everything on hard drives, okay? But they're still there. If you have a CD, you don't know how to create your own boot drive onto a thumb drive, use an optical drive, okay? They're about $30 for a DVD drive. The only other thing that you might want to consider, because this is a virtual reality build, are how many USB ports you have, okay? Now, the reason I mention that is the best style is your USB 3. Those are the fastest ones. And you can see here, the blue ones are your USB 3, okay? So this motherboard has the older style, USB 2. It has 2 of those. Use this for your mouse and your keyboard. The blue ones, the USB 3.0, use that for Vive, use that for your Oculus Rift, okay? You're also going to generally have 2 on the modern cases of the USB 3s on the front panel of your case or the front top of your case. That likewise would be for stuff like a webcam or Rift or Vive. All of those are fine to plug it into, okay? So the only other consideration, maybe you have a decent motherboard from a friend, it's the one component you maybe didn't buy. You could pick yourself up a USB 3 expansion card. This is a PCI Express one. It'll give you 2 USB 3. That's important if the one that you want to install is the Vive. So say you got a motherboard from a friend, you have a Vive, you're saving money, you're watching your costs, you're probably not going to have enough USB ports on a slightly older motherboard, right? Like maybe it's a Sandy Bridge like I talked about, and you've got 2 USB 3. That's not going to be enough. You buy an expansion card for additional 3.0, $20, $30, you get 2 extra ports, you plug it into the PCI Express. Try to look for one that's powered, like this uses SATA power. Those are generally the ones that will run at the top rated USB 3.0 speed. And then the last thing that you need for the system is that. And did I give anything on there? No, I did not. So it's okay. I don't have to cover anything. That's your Windows OEM. So I have here Windows Home 64-bit. Generally, I do Pro Edition because I network computers, right? But if you're just at home, Home Edition is fine. 125 bucks Canadian gets you that. So there you have it, guys. That's the first in the How to Build Your Own VR Rig series. Next episode is going to be the fun one where we actually do the building. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any outstanding questions on parts, I think I've covered most of it. Feel free to ask in the comments below. I will answer your questions. And other than that, we will catch you guys on the flip side for episode 2, where we actually put this puppy together. Cheers, guys.